First of all, my notion of a single state for Israel is not. It'd be very foolish for me to sort of prescribe that as a, any kind of particular, political configuration, since it's something that the peoples will have to work out. The foundation of the single state would have to be the end of the Zionist claim that this is a Jewish state. And I think once the ethnic purity of the state of Israel is admitted to be an impossibility, then we have a long and difficult period of negotiations and mutual accommodations, but I think quite a possible one. But it'll involve a lot of work. Switzerland is no society is perfect, of course. They're all relatively illegitimate. Insofar as, to get to the last questioner, that we have a class system. If there's a class system in the world where certain people own the means of production and other people own nothing but their right to work for them, then we have structural inequality across the board. And that will obviously play itself out also in racial ways. So Switzerland is very fortunate, and it has very clever bankers and so on, and has vast amounts of money to play with. And so, it's nice and neat and clean and sort of boring, and I don't know. I like Geneva, as a matter of fact, but most of Switzerland is, I think it's a little too dull. I like Queens in New York a lot better, where there are 199 different languages spoken. So I like the sense of a rich diversity and the idea of society from below, but we understand that no society is fully democratic until all humans are liberated and the like. All I mean to say is that we have to accept that the current situation is a total disaster. And by any standards, I think it's impossible to really imagine the state of Israel persisting as a Jewish state all that much longer. I think it's becoming internally exhausted, the level of demoralization, nihilism, and the like. It may conduce to some kind of horrific war, which we all, the brink of which we are all teetering on, which could rewrite the entire map of the region, could even destroy it. I don't know what's going to happen. I do know that the only way that the state of Israel does keep going is through ever-expanding militarism, constantly trying to, knock down those people who stand in its way, constantly arming itself, constantly descending into paranoia, constantly, blaming everybody, suppressing debate here, there, and everywhere. So this hopeless situation, in my view, I think it can change and will change. Now, one thing I would say, I guess a lot of people want to talk, let me just mention one thing. The key point in getting the state of Israel beyond being a Jewish state is to accept for the Palestinians what is accepted for the Jews, namely the right of return. That there is in international law, and has been since 1948, the right of displaced peoples to return to those lands from which they have been forcibly expropriated. And that right must be accepted for the Palestinians. Once that right is accepted, then the whole idea of Zionism in a Jewish state begins to dissolve. And I think we'll see it's not so bad, The status quo is horrible, but we have to begin to get people to accept that reality and to gradually work it through. And then the people on the ground are the ones who are going to have to figure it out. So basically, there's 3 stages. I've given you the first stage and the third stage. The third stage is fight for the Palestinian right of return and organize. But the second stage is specific organizing against the Israeli lobbies and specific campaigns to do to a racist state of Israel what was done to the racist state of South Africa, namely impose boycotts and sanctions and disinvestments. That's a 3-part international project. You can follow it on the internet. It's taking place all over. In the last 6 months, there have been big changes in England, in which first the Journalists' Union and second the Union of British Academics agreed to boycott the state of Israel. Now that's very important development. Great Britain is a big player in all this, and they're much ahead of us, by the way, and certainly in the United States, and I do believe in Canada too. But they are, so what? They're ahead, we can follow along. And when those verdicts came down, the Zionist lobbies went crazy. They said, oh my God, you can't boycott this. you can boycott Israel academic. I mean, that's suppressing, free speech and so on. But the point is, you have to do what's necessary. It's nonviolent. You have to make a miscreant feel that they are losing their standing in the world. And to say it again, the state of Israel is extremely sensitive to that, more so than the South Africa was. Because see, South Africa has a powerful economy. It's just, if you've been there, it's a huge industrial base, all the minerals it needs, plenty to spare, good agricultural lands, huge. It's a powerhouse. Israel is very fragile. It's a casino economy. It survives by the kindness of strangers, by defense industries. Diamonds, that's its biggest source of exchange, by the way. You should pay attention to that. You might want to think about boycotting diamonds and stuff. But no, serious. But that's the way it goes. There are these intermediate campaigns if you want to make a difference. And it rests upon doing research, it rests upon international solidarity, it rests upon working, within your country, across borders. And then the third stage is the Palestinian right of return. And let's see what happens.
Yes, the back. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. And I appreciate it's probably difficult for you to say that, and I think it's well said. But it overlooks a point that I make at great length in the book, and so you have to fully, appreciate that only by reading the book. But I go into detail about this because you're right. I mean, every state has plenty of skeletons in its closet, and human history is full of crimes of various sorts. The point when I say state-induced racism, or really state-structured racism, I mean when the fundamental contract of society does not permit any overcoming of that within its own terms. See, now that was the case, for instance, in the United States with slavery. And it took a horrific civil war to dislodge that. But after the Civil War, or really in the course of the Civil War, thanks to the genius of Lincoln, who put together these, terribly vexing contradictions, we were able in the United States to develop a form of state system through amendments to the Constitution, okay, that basically advanced the original notion of universal human rights to the point where it became possible, I didn't say inevitable or easy, but possible for the formerly enslaved blacks to achieve a significant degree of equality and social mobility. Now, by no means did that mean the struggle was over. We know the long history, and the United States is still a violently racist country, okay? But it's not a country whose basic constitution prohibits any change in the racist situation. It's a country where you can have a black woman, Condoleezza Rice, running foreign policy. You can have a black man, Barack Obama, possibly being the next president, and so on. It's irrespective of what one thinks about these people. The point is that they can move within the system at this point. Once having, well, of course, Obama's people come from Kenya, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, the point is, a black can move within the United States at this point. They're not held back. The struggle continued over generations. It reached its peak in the 60s when finally a Voting Rights Act was passed, and thanks to the civil rights movements, it was and remains hellish. It's really difficult. And if you would ask me, what to do about the United States, I say, well, I have a little button on my wall at home. It says "U.S. out of North America." I'd like to see the United States out of North America. Okay. I think it's dreadful, but that's and I think it sows just havoc everywhere. And I spend most of my time trying to fix it in some way, but it does not belong in that category. It's shot full of racism. I could spend hours talking. My first book was about racism, it's called White Racism. So I've studied this for years. I could spend hours detailing it, but the point is that there's a certain fluidity in the United States constitutional structure that allows that, as there was not in the structure of South African apartheid, as there is not in the structure of Israel, which are at the same level as the United States was before the Civil War, namely that the fundamental doctrines prohibit any social mobility within ethnical or racial groups, and lock the power differentials into place by the force of law. Now, in Israel, it's rather peculiar because the state of Israel does not even have a constitution. Not many people know that. They keep saying, oh, we've got to get around to having a constitution. Well, you know why they don't have a constitution, by the way, because if they had a constitution, they would have to incorporate universal human rights into it. You can't possibly have a constitution that mandates racism. Okay, and if they incorporated universal human rights, they'd have to abolish themselves. And that's why they don't have a constitution. You won't see it. Instead, they have a law that was put on the books in 1984, which just formalized the practices up to that point. And it's all written about in my book. You know, the middle part of my book is a very, probably the longest part of my book is an analysis of the Jewish state, of its various contradictions, of how its racism is put into practice, which is very complex. There's a book by a man named Uri Davis, which is called Apartheid Israel. I commend it to you. It details. It's a it's a labyrinthine set of legalisms and shell games and so on. It's very complicated. But the essence of it is to lock the Palestinians, anybody who is non-Jewish, out of any approach to power. In 1984, through very odd means I don't want to get into because there would be too much background to waste your time with, they said, Knesset passed a law saying it is against the law for any entity that questions the fundamental Jewish nature of the state to achieve power in this government. They said that's a law. It would be equivalent to the United States saying it is against the law for any entity which would allow a black to become president to have any power in the system. That's what I mean when I say it's formal racist structures. It's not the racism that seeps around a dominative society because the way class distinctions are displaced onto racial distinctions and the like, the complicated social, psychological formations that we see. It's built into the very structure of the system. Therefore, it requires a change in the system. To be very blunt about it, it requires that Israel not be a Jewish state. That's the point. That's my point. You can question it. I'm sure it hurts because the notion of a Jewish state is so deeply embedded. I think it's a terrible idea. I think everybody would be better for it. And I know in my heart, although I'm not sure that people aren't going to say, yeah, you're right, I know it'd be better for the Jews. I really do. Because I think Israel has been terrible for the Jewish people. It has induced this conqueror mentality. It has created a kind of nihilism, a brutal militarism. It has the greatness of the Jewish people came when they didn't have a state. When they were just the so-called rootless cosmopolitans, which I think is rather neat, as a matter of fact. Because you stand here with Spinoza, you're standing here with Marx, with Einstein, with Wittgenstein, people who were born Jewish, but somehow knew that they had to just move within the interstices of Western society, and they achieved achieved fantastic heights of creativity. Very rich thing. The state of Israel, a lot of good technical stuff, but no real creativity. No militarized, warrior, Spartan-type state can ever achieve that. It's a dreadful human arrangement, and Israel is locked into it by virtue of its allegiance to its essential demand that the state be Jewish. That's what I think has to be overcome.